Imagine a world without graveyards, a world where the words goodbye, pain, and shame just don't exist. This isn't some far-off fantasy. In many ways, it's the world that was supposed to be. The story we all know is about paradise lost. But what if, in another timeline, paradise was never lost at all? What if it just kept expanding, covering the whole globe in a perfect, unbroken harmony between people, nature, and God? This is the story of that world. A reality where humanity never fell because Adam never ate the forbidden fruit. It's a timeline without death, suffering, or sin. But in gaining all of that, humanity would have missed out on something huge: the knowledge of good and evil. So, what would we be like? What would civilization look like in a world where we never learned the difference between right and wrong? To figure out where we might have gone, we first have to remember where we started. The first pages of Genesis paint a picture of a world that's fundamentally different from ours. It wasn't just a place, but a state of being. God creates a world he calls good, a world perfectly suited for humanity. At the heart of it all is a garden, Eden, a sanctuary of perfect harmony. Into this garden, God places the first man, Adam, formed from the dust, and the first woman, Eve, from his side. Their life was one of profound simplicity and connection. They lived in direct, unfiltered communion with their Creator. The text says God would walk with them in the garden in the cool of the day, a picture of casual, unbroken friendship that's almost impossible for us to wrap our heads around. There was no fear, no shame, no reason to hide from God. Theologians call this a state of original innocence. This harmony wasn't just between them and God, it extended to all of creation. The ground wasn't cursed with thorns and thistles, so work wasn't painful toil, but a joyful act of tending to the world. The command to be fruitful and multiply came without the curse of pain in childbirth. And most importantly, death hadn't entered the human story yet. In the garden stood two special trees, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and the tree of life, which seems to be what sustained their physical immortality. The instructions were simple. Adam and Eve could eat from any tree in the garden, including the tree of life. There was only one rule: don't eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The consequence was laid out clearly. For in the day that you eat of it, you shall surely die. That was the setup. A perfect world, a close relationship with God, and a single, simple test of loyalty. A test that, in our timeline, we failed. And this is where our story splits in two. The serpent, described as the craftiest of all the animals, comes to Eve and questions God's command, planting a seed of doubt. It reframes the rule not as a loving protection, but as a jealous restriction. God knows, the serpent says, that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. In our story, Eve is convinced. She eats the fruit and gives some to her husband, Adam, and he eats. This is the moment we call the fall, the act of disobedience that sent ripples of corruption through all of human history. But in this alternate timeline, the story plays out differently. The serpent makes its case. Eve looks at the fruit and sees that it's beautiful and desirable. She takes it. But when she offers it to Adam, he stops. He looks at his wife, he looks at the fruit, and he remembers the one clear command from the God he walks with every day. He remembers the promised consequence, death. And in that critical moment, he makes a different choice. He says no. He puts his trust in his Creator above his own curiosity. In that instant, the course of reality splits. The serpent's temptation fails. The test is passed. There's no sin, no hiding in shame, no panicked rush to cover up. There's only the quiet relief of a temptation overcome. The foundational act of disobedience that defines our world never happens. The fall is completely averted. The immediate result of Adam's choice isn't some huge dramatic event. Instead, it's that nothing is lost. The curse is never spoken because the sin that would have caused it never happened. Adam and Eve aren't kicked out of the Garden of Eden. They stay in that place of perfect harmony and abundance. The ground isn't cursed, and the idea of surviving through painful, sweaty work remains completely unknown. Their relationship with God, the biggest casualty of the fall, remains unbroken. There's no fear, no separation. The daily walks with God continue, and their understanding of the world grows not through a harsh lesson, but through continued fellowship. They would still grow in wisdom, but it would be a wisdom given by God, not one stolen in rebellion. And what about the command to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth? That was given before the fall, and would still apply. So, humanity would start to grow. But instead of being cast out into a harsh world, it's logical to assume the borders of Eden itself would just expand. The harmony and perfection of the garden would spread outward as humanity did, turning the entire planet into a global Eden, tended by God's ever-growing family. The two trees would remain. The tree of life would still be available, its fruit sustaining the physical immortality of a growing human race. But the tree of the knowledge of good and evil would now be a monument, not to a failure, but to a victory. A reminder of humanity's founding choice of loyalty. Maybe it would remain as a test for new generations, or maybe, having served its purpose, its knowledge would be granted in a new way once humanity had matured. Either way, it's no longer a source of temptation, but a symbol of trust. Generations pass, millennia pass. Humanity fills an earth that is entirely Eden. What does life actually look like for these immortal, innocent beings? The ripple effects of that one choice would shape every part of human existence into something we can barely recognize. Let's start with our minds. The idea of original sin, that all humans are born with a tendency to do wrong, wouldn't exist. This isn't just a theological idea. It would fundamentally rewire us. Without an built-in pull towards evil, concepts like selfishness, greed, envy, and pride would be totally alien. Relationships would be built on perfect love and trust. There'd be no violence, no crime, no war. And if there's no crime, there's no need for locks, laws, police, or governments as we know them. Society would just be one giant, harmonious family. Our emotions would be different too. The forbidden fruit gave knowledge of both good and evil. Without it, humanity would stay innocent. There'd be no guilt, no shame, no fear of judgment. Think about what that means for our culture. So much of our art, literature, and music comes from struggle, tragedy, and loss. What does art look like without heartbreak? What's a story without a villain? Human creativity would still be there, but it would be channeled into expressing pure joy, wonder, and worship, not processing a broken world. Physically, people would be immortal. By eating from the tree of life, humans wouldn't get sick, age, or die. So the population would grow forever. How could the planet handle that? Well, in a perfect, uncursed creation, it's reasonable to think resources would be abundant and renewable. The entire concept of scarcity might not exist. This leads to technology. Most of our innovation is driven by need to overcome scarcity, cure disease, fight wars, or make hard labor easier. In this alternate world, those needs don't exist. So, what would drive progress? Maybe not need, but pure curiosity and a desire to create. Technology might not be industrial, but biological and perfectly blended with nature. Imagine cities that grow like forests or tools that are living extensions of the world. All made not to solve problems, but to create new kinds of beauty. Thinking about a reality so different from our own really makes you question the foundations of our world, doesn't it? If you're finding this dive into an alternate timeline as fascinating as I do, take a second to subscribe and hit that notification bell. We explore big questions like this all the time, and you won't want to miss where we go next. Zooming out, the theological consequences of a world without the fall are just staggering. The entire story of redemption that sits at the core of Judaism and Christianity would be gone. Without sin, there's no separation from God to fix. Without the fall, There's no need for a rescue plan. The grand story of the Old Testament, the covenant with Abraham, the exodus from Egypt, the giving of the law, wouldn't happen. In Christian theology, these events were all part of God's plan to manage a fallen world and prepare it for a Redeemer. In a world that never fell, none of that is necessary. Most profoundly, the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ would have no context. The cross, the central symbol of Christianity, is God's answer to the problem of sin and death. If sin and death never entered the human story, the ultimate sacrifice to beat them wouldn't be needed. This timeline also raises some deep questions about free will. Humanity passed its first test, but would it be the only one? Or would new challenges pop up? And what about that knowledge of good and evil? Was humanity never meant to have it? Or was it something God planned to give them eventually, once they were ready? In this alternate reality, evil is just an abstract idea. They know of disobedience like we know about a hypothetical math problem, but they've never felt its sting. They know goodness because they live it. Evil is just a story about a talking snake and a path not taken. Their understanding of God's goodness would be huge, but it would be the goodness of a child who has never known anything else. It would be pure, but maybe not as deep as a goodness chosen in the face of real evil. A light that's more brilliant because you've known the darkness. So, where does that leave us? With a vision of a breathtakingly perfect world, an immortal human race, free from pain, shame, and death, living on a perfect earth in constant, loving friendship with their Creator. A world with no war, no tears, no funerals. It's the paradise we were promised, a true utopia. And yet, when you really think about this alternate timeline, you see what it's missing. It's missing concepts like forgiveness, mercy, and grace, because the failures that make them so powerful never happened. It's missing the quiet strength of a faith that's been tested by fire. It lacks the deep empathy that comes from shared suffering. The story of our world is defined by the fall. It's a story of loss, yes, but it's also a story of redemption. It gives our lives a certain weight, a struggle against darkness, a deep desire for reunion, and the hard-won appreciation for a love that comes looking for us even when we're lost. The world where Adam never ate the fruit is one of perfect harmony. Our world is one of heroic and divine love. And it leaves us with a final, massive question. What do you think would be the greatest beauty or the greatest loss in a world that never knew what it was like to be broken?